Tim introduced himself to us as a leading or the, what did you say, the leading or a leading?
I've been encouraged to use the.
Okay, there we go. So I want to use your suggested wording. So he's the leading expert on purpose, and I found it interesting. I'm going to share it here. Why he calls himself like that? Because he's indeed a significant expert, and I like his logic saying, so far I haven't come across anybody who's actually more expert on this. So as long as this is my experience, I'm actually the leading expert. I like to believe so. I have a waiver up front. I read his book. I used his book. I found my purpose. So already I'm sold on Tim Kelley since 5 years ago. Thanks for the hint of Hendrik Jan, who, when I inquired, give me some idea on how to work my purpose. He said, read the book by Tim Kelley, True Purpose, that's his name, and that's all you need. And it worked for me. Well, being an expert, so he didn't do this all the time. He has a bachelor degree in math, interesting, from MIT. So a lot of brainware. At the same time, you spent some time in the military and handled explosives, and as well as a submarine repair unit. That's an interesting twist. And I guess right after, I don't know when, doesn't really matter that much, you went into the camp of, I guess it's both coaching and consulting. And I think it's
I went over to the dark side and left technology. Yes.
And I think it's on two main areas. It's not only one. Even we're going to focus on one is purpose and everything around purpose, and we're going to cover that. The other one is he's actually got a lot of ingredients, a lot of expertise on organizational models, especially on self-organization, holacracy, sociocracy, et cetera, et cetera. And for those that are in conscious capitalism and that connect to the movement, he was one of the leaders, without being specific, who drove the program in the US for sure, that trained and certified consultants on conscious practices. So deeply embedded in conscious business, deeply experienced in everything from math explosives up to purpose. What a combination. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Okay, let's start from the very top. If people listen to the word purpose, there may be different definitions. I'm not going to ask you can even quote a definition, whatever you think is useful. What is a useful definition of purpose for people to get to really grip to what you mean when you refer to purpose?
So this question makes my heart sing, because as a mathematician, I'm legally required to define my terms before I start using them. So that was one of the things that drove me nuts about engineers, was they would just start throwing things around without defining them. I had to switch majors. I couldn't handle it. To me, purpose is the definition I like. There's lots of excellent definitions, but the definition I like, because it's so simple, is that purpose is the answer to the question why. So if I ask someone, why did you come to this meeting today? The answer is their purpose in coming to the meeting. If I ask someone, why did you buy that car? The answer would be their purpose in buying the car. And in that sense, the term is a synonym. If you look it up, to like an aim or a goal or an intention or something like that, they're all kind of close together. But in this context, we're usually talking about the purpose of a person or the purpose of a company or something more substantial like that, rather than the purpose of an individual decision. And so that would be the answer to the question. So an individual's purpose is the answer to the question, why are you here? Why you exist at all? And the purpose of a company would be, why does this company exist? Which nonprofits are very good at answering, and for-profits are absolutely horrifically bad at answering. For-profit companies are very good at answering what they do and terrible at answering why they do it.
Okay. How did you find your purpose? What is it, by the way?
Yeah, it was a long and grueling process. I would say that I started my purpose unconsciously at age 4 and consciously at age 21. And it took me until 41 to find it. And I was in a class held by one of my buddies, a woman named Maya Weeder, who currently lives in Paris. She was in Lisbon for a while. Oh, no, wait. Yes, she's in Paris. That's right. She was in Rome for a while too. She's a famous public speaker, good friend of mine, and we would take each other's courses. And it was my turn to take hers. And the homework that night was, what are your dreams for your life? Which is more of a vision question, but it's very purpose adjacent. And I had no idea. I was very much a technocrat and had no clue how to answer the question, and sat there with writer's block for like 5 minutes. I never get writer's block. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to class empty-handed. And all of a sudden, a whole bunch of stuff showed up. And it technically the right term for it would be a revelation, right? I mean, I got a download all of a sudden. And it included my life purpose, and it also included what is now called the true purpose process. At that point, it didn't have a name.
We're gonna get to the process. We're gonna get to the process.
And so the thing I got in that moment was a mission, to use my terminology now, and that mission was to transform business from a profit-driven enterprise to a purpose-driven enterprise. And that was almost 22 years ago. And no one was talking about it then. And I thought, oh my God, I'm nuts. What am I going to do? And I started doing it. And so I was actually very early. I was before, a lot of these other people who now are very famous talking about purpose. I wouldn't say I've converted as many as they have. I haven't gotten the same degree of impact that some of these folks had, but I started a lot earlier and I've been doing it a lot longer, talking about the connection between purpose and business.
Okay. Now you mentioned already the method, and this is one of the key things I want to explore, because as you gave us an idea on what is purpose, and I love the simplicity of your answer, the answer to the question why, and you talked about how long it took yourself to find your purpose. I have a curiosity there. Let's see if there's a quick answer to this, because I'm sure there's a lot of complexity behind it. Is it normal that finding a true purpose actually is very iterative and may easily take years or decades?
It can certainly take years or decades to find one's purpose. And there's a simple reason for that, which is the neurolinguistic programming people teach that the brain does very poorly with why questions. So coaches and therapists and folks like that who are trained in neurolinguistic programming almost never ask their clients why questions, because the brain does so poorly with them. And because purpose is inherently a why question, if you ask somebody, what is your purpose, their brain almost immediately locks up. I mean, it's practically inevitable. And so it's very difficult to find your own purpose. That's reason number one why it's a problem. I'll get into reason number two in a minute. And so, but there's a funny phenomenon that I can't explain, which is that people imagine that they ought to be able to figure out their own purpose, as I did, and think that they should either know the answer or be able to figure it out on their own without help. Now, if you ask someone, we'd like you to perform brain surgery on this person, or the pilot has just passed out, would you be willing to fly this plane? Most people will quickly say, I'm not qualified. I haven't done the proper training to perform brain surgery or fly an Airbus jet or whatever, right? But if you ask them to find their purpose, they'll immediately start trying, even though they have no training and no idea how to do it whatsoever, and then get frustrated with themselves that they're unable to do so. Whereas they won't get frustrated with themselves about the brain surgery or the flying the plane or playing a piano or something like that. They know that they're not qualified. They know they don't know how, and they know they need training in order to do it. And so people will try over and over again, asking themselves the question and try different things without seeking help. And it was very frustrating for me and very frustrating for others. Now I figured out that I needed help, and I started reading books and stuff, and they were very inspiring, but they had almost no methodology in them. There was little to nothing about how to find your purpose in the various books available at the time.
Okay. The reason that I want to test, maybe there's a simple yes or no, because we cannot go into the life story of Tim or Constantine or anybody else,
Hmm.
is because of the ups and downs, the pitfalls, experiences, and us growing as humans, as beings, I thought that answering this question actually comes a lot with as life experience grows on oneself. And for that reason, I myself, but again, that was my curiosity if this is a generic phenomenon, being ripened to do this exercise usefully. Obviously, one can follow the technique,
Hmm.
actually takes some years or decades of life experience, uh, having as holistic view of your own life and the world that you're impacting as possible. Does that matter at all? Or do you say
It
purpose
matters with the
exercises run
usual
the same
method.
way with a 25-year-old than with a 45-year-old?
It matters with the usual method. The way that, so other than people just sort of getting frustrated trying to figure out their purpose, if you actually go and hire a coach or a consultant or someone like that who says, oh, I can help you find that because I've been trained in some method, 99% of the time, the method they'll use is one where they'll ask you a bunch of questions about
Yeah,
your life experience and
yeah,
ask you, when have you felt most fulfilled, or what would you do if you had a year to live, or if you won the lottery, or those kinds of questions, which are designed to not be why questions. They're what questions, but they're very purpose adjacent. They're like right next to the purpose question without asking the purpose itself. And if you collect enough data, you can find patterns in the answers. That method requires life experience because the person has to have had enough experiences in
yeah.
order to be able to accurately answer questions about themselves and their history. That's not the only method. That one does require life experience. And that one, I would say you probably need to be at least 21, ideally at least 25, to use that method. It turns out that finding your purpose younger than that, which I've done several times, isn't that useful because
Okay,
people who are
okay,
15, 16 years old don't have a tremendous amount of freedom about how they spend their time unless they've like bailed from home and aren't going to school and stuff like that. So it's not all that. A lot of people said, oh, we should find children's purpose, and it's like, well,
okay.
maybe
Got it.
not, you
Got
know.
it, got it, got it, got it, got it.
Yeah.
That leads me to a quick question to the audience,
Mhm.
and I'm not going to inviting them to speak. I'm going to invite them to write. Obviously, it's totally voluntary. I invite them to write down if they have worked their own purpose. I am pretty sure many of the audience, being pretty mature in their way to become conscious capitalists, I'm using that as a generic label, they probably worked their purpose. And what I'm inviting the audience is, if anybody of you, personal, or some of you may lead a business, you may have a coaching or consulting business, whatever your situation, and it doesn't have to be the same purpose, share it in the chat. I'm just curious that we read some of the exercises people have gone through. As we do that, and people share, those that want to share their own purpose, personal or business, and you can label it so people can understand the context. I know in the book, um, I know in the book, True Purpose, you outlined, because I read it and I used it, 12 different ways how to find your purpose. Now, I'm not inviting you to describe all them. That would take time, too much time. But maybe you can, in all briefness, outline a couple, and you would know best how to do that.
Yeah.
Let's say archetypes, because I remember
Right.
there's some variants. They're
That's
not
right.
not totally different. So what are the couple archetypes that you said, these are ways how to find your purpose? Because I found it very interesting, the deep variety from very methodological, very cognitive to totally intuitive. That's the
Yep.
breadth I'd like you to outline.
Correct. So the method I just described is the archetype of the more cognitive method, and it's best done with someone else because it's difficult for us to observe our own patterns, as most people have probably noticed. And so if you're with a friend or a coach or somebody like that, writing extensively about, so times when you felt passionate or aligned or things that are very important to you are data points. Those are hints at what your purpose might be. And so if you get enough of that data and go through it with somebody, you may
Mm.
find patterns, and those patterns can be clues to some sort of simple purpose statement.
Right.
So that's archetypal method number one, and probably at least 95% of purpose work that's done in a concerted methodological way is some variation on what I just described.
Okay.
The other archetypal method is to seek information from the unconscious. And this
Okay.
is a
Interesting.
very different approach. So many people believe that they already have a purpose, but they don't know consciously what it is, and they're looking for it, right? And for those of you who do know your purpose, you want to think back to before you knew it.
Mm.
And this this sense of like, well, I want to know my purpose. Excuse me. I want to know my purpose. I want to find it. If you're looking for it and you want to find it, that implies that it already exists. So if I have a purpose and I don't know what it is, by definition, that purpose is unconscious. That's what unconscious means. It's true about me, but I'm not aware of it. So if that's true, that means I should be able to go into my own unconscious and find it in there somewhere. And so then various methods for exploring the unconscious can be used to get purpose information. Things like meditation or sleeping dreams or writing out dialogues with aspects of the unconscious, things like that.
Mm.
Seeking information. And this is the method I use most because it provides the most accurate purpose information and the largest quantity of purpose information. It's trickier than the other method because people have some degree of fear about going into the unconscious and learning things about themselves they don't already know. There's like a natural resistance to unconscious things becoming conscious. And so we have to overcome that natural resistance in order for this to work. But it turns out in most cases, it's not that hard to do. So once we've cleared the fears of the question being answered,
Mm.
then we can use any one of these methods for poking around in the unconscious to get something to answer about what the purpose is. And this is the way I like to do it is it's like, think of it like placing a phone call to someone who knows the answer and asking them and having them tell you. And so the question that automatically raises, well, who's on the other end of the phone? And the answer to that depends on the individual's belief system. So if I were a Christian, then maybe God or Jesus knows my purpose. If I were a Buddhist, my Buddha nature might know my purpose. If I were a Native American, my spirit animal or my ancestors might know my purpose. If I were a very rational secular person who didn't believe in any of that woo-woo
Okay.
stuff, then maybe my intuition might know my purpose, or my gut, or my heart, or
Yeah,
my
that's
inner
clear.
truth, or something like that, my
Yeah.
higher self, right? So it actually doesn't really matter how you define it or how you name it, as long as the definition of the name makes sense to you.
Okay.
And then you can set up a dialogue with that thing that you chose and say, hey, what's my purpose? And if
Okay.
you've done a good job of clearing the fears, it will answer.
Okay. This is cool. So we don't have time to go into more detail.
Mhm.
I invite you to maybe mention in a sentence or two a method that I tried as well. I found it very intriguing, where
Yeah.
you invite the person that looks for, to define his purpose to explicitly ask his environment, assuming that what people perceive in oneself, what people
Hmm.
see in oneself, what they
Yep.
sense, etc.,
Yep.
actually transpires. So while you may not get it, and it may not be clear to yourself using whatever method, it may be clear for the environment that actually you're exposed to. If you want to add a sentence to that, I found it a very different, interesting method you're describing as well. Ask
Yeah,
your
you have to
and
ask like at
reflect it
least
back to
10
you.
people, but you can also find patterns in their responses, but the question matters. So the question that accomplishment coaching in San Diego uses is what shows up when I show up,
Yeah, for
right?
example.
For example, and that will get you a aspect of type of purpose statement called an essence, which has to do with your being state. people, and anyone can answer that question. Interestingly, they don't even have to know you that well, because as soon as you show up, it's there, whatever it is. It's actually easier for people to validate the answer. Like if you tell them what you think it is, they can tell you immediately whether it's correct or not. It's a little harder for them to answer it as an open-ended question, but they can if you ask enough people.
Okay, cool.
And then people who know you well can also give you hints about the transformation you create, which is your sort of the doing of purpose, which is we all unconsciously, intentionally are trying to create some transformation in the people around us, but it's completely invisible to us, but it's not invisible to them.
Exactly.
And so whatever that is, people who know you well, strangers can't do this, but people who know you well can potentially give you clues to that and definitely validate it. If you think you know what it is, they can tell you whether you're right or not.
Thanks. I'm going to have one more question on personal purpose. And
yeah,
while I listen to Tim, I'm transparent. Half of a I read and check the purposes that people share in the chat. Really, really interesting, really inspiring.
mm-hmm.
And while I read through them, the question matured in my mind that, and this is not an opportunity to get a lecture from you on purpose writing, but I
Mm-hmm.
remember that you outline a couple, I don't know, 3, 4 key ingredients on that you recommend. This is a way what a structure, what a purpose should address or be structured. I think you have some elements. Maybe you can mention them so people have them in their mind,
Sure.
what these elements are.
Yeah,
so do you work best when formulating a purpose?
So there's different kind of formats, if you will. And if you go to other consultants and coaches, they'll have completely different formats. This is just in Tim land. And so there are 4 different ways of formatting a purpose statement in the True Purpose system. And so some of them have to do with being, like, for example, if we see what was the very first one that was shared here, to be a catalyst for world peace. So I could say, I am a catalyst for world peace. That's a being statement, it has the verb to be in it, right? So here I am sitting here, a catalyst. Catalyst doesn't necessarily have to run around and do stuff. That's not how catalysts work, right? So I can just sit here and be a catalyst for world peace. That's a type of purpose statement called an essence that starts with I am.
Okay, number 1.
That's the being part. And then number 2 is the doing, where it's now I'm going to go do stuff to people or organizations, and I'm going to do it over and over again. A good example of that is to inspire everyone to his or her greatness. So I inspire you to your greatness. I inspire Claudia to her greatness. I inspire Stefan to his greatness. Now, not everyone may want me to do that for them, but assuming they're willing and need it, I could do that many, many times to many different people. And if it's successful, I will feel fulfilled by that because I'm doing my purpose. That's the second format. I do this, right? I inspire people to their greatness. That we call a blessing in the sense of I'm blessing you. I'm doing something to you.
Okay. What's the third?
The third is a mission. An example of that would be shift
great you pick
business.
Examples. It's great you do that.
Yeah, they're great. They're right here. Shift business for the benefit of all. That's also a doing. The thing that distinguishes it from the blessing doing, which is the repeatable one, is the mission doing you can only do once. Once business is shifted, mission complete, check.
Yeah.
Create world peace, end world hunger, save the whales. All of those have an implied end point. Now, it may be very difficult to imagine achieving it, but the sentence itself implies that it could be completed. And if it were completed, just like in the military, mission complete, and now we have to go do something else.
Okay.
And the last one is message, which is you're here to say what to the rest of us. Every one of us has some wisdom or something to share. What's the most purposeful thing you could say to the rest of the world? That's the message. And there's no format for that. Any whole sentence could be a message.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to switch tone here to go to the business side. And there's a couple things I find very intriguing. At the same time, it's halftime. I'm inviting again the audience. Put in your questions in the chat box. I take the liberty to check if when they may fit in, but the idea is that you start participating or contributing. I may even invite you, given the chat outlines the name who asked the question, to ask the question verbally yourself, to actually open the microphones. My question on the business side is, describe us, and I know you have to be very, very brief, because in a business side, you're not talking about a single individuum and doing the variety of techniques that you outlined briefly. You have a whole system, tens, hundreds, thousands of employees. So
Correct.
the point I want to get to right away is, give us an idea on how companies should orchestrate finding a purpose in the tens, the hundreds, the thousands of employees. And maybe you can refer to some examples where
Sure.
you've done that.
Yep. There's a trade-off, which is the fewer people who are involved, the faster you'll get to an answer.
Yeah.
And companies often think about it that way, and they say, oh, well, if we just involve the executive team, we'll have a result in a few weeks or something, which is true. The better way to measure the amount of time is the time from when you ask the question to when people are actually using the answer. And
Okay.
if you just get 1 or 10 people to find the answer, unless it's a 1 or 10 person company, whoever it is who finds the answer now has a tremendously difficult task ahead of them, which is to sell the answer to all the people who didn't participate. And that's a real uphill slog. And so it's actually more efficient in the long run to involve many more people in the process and take a little longer to get to the answer. Interestingly, not that much longer. Take a little longer to get to the answer. And now everyone who participated is an ambassador for that purpose to everyone who didn't. And so, and in my experience, leaders resist this because they're thinking in terms of time to answer. And I'm like, that's not the meaningful time. The time to answer, having the answer doesn't actually buy you anything. It's time to implementation. It's when people are actually acting on it and living it and using it in decision making. That's the amount of
Okay.
time.
I want to add something
Yeah.
specific here, because you haven't outlined a 10-step process. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've read the paper. And interestingly enough, I want to be specific for the benefit of the audience. You call it one of the first steps, if not the first one, gathering purpose data, exactly what
Yep.
you mentioned. And you
Correct.
outline actually a specific question. I'm sure there's a
Mm-hmm.
variance of the question where you said, where, for example, you ask, I guess, in theory, all employees at least are invited to provide to a question that, what is the greatest contribution this organization could make to the world?
Mm-hmm. That's if we're
And
using the 99% method where we're not going into the unconscious. That would be an example of a company version of when did you feel most fulfilled?
exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What is the next step after you ask such a question? And I guess you're inviting everybody to give input. You may get a lot, you may get less.
Yep. Yep.
The input is
So,
gathered. What is logically the next step if one would do, and I'm now going through the ideal process. You engage
good.
with everybody, you
Yep.
ask everybody,
Yep.
you get input, then what?
So now we have tens, hundreds, or thousands, potentially tens of thousands of pieces of purpose data that were derived either by asking a bunch of questions like, what's the greatest contribution this company could make, or what would this company do that would make you feel really proud of it, or something like that, which is method 1, the conscious method. Or we have a bunch of data from having people go into their own unconscious and ask about the company's purpose.
Yeah,
But
possible.
either way, we now have tens, hundreds, thousands of pieces of purpose data of wildly varying quality. And so the next thing to do is to get a group of people together, and it can be a small group or a large group. And again, you can use volunteers, and fewer people will show up because this is more work. And have them read all the statements out loud, all 500 of them or whatever. And then you throw away any statement that didn't generate physical and emotional reactions in the people who read them out loud. Very important, physical and emotional reactions. Most people looking at purpose statements will naturally, logically ask themselves questions like, is that true? Do I think that will be useful in marketing? Do I think that's a good purpose statement? All of these questions are misleading. The better question is, did I feel something when
Okay.
I said that purpose statement? And so now we've just eliminated
Interesting.
probably 70 to 80% of the data on the first pass because less than half the group that read it had a reaction to it, and we just throw it away.
Okay. Let me interject here. It was a question.
Sure.
How much in your experience, given you've ran this through a huge number of companies, does the subset of volunteers or less volunteers, that maybe a group of more executives or people that come from a specific area because they're more purposey, HR, whatever folks, whoever the group, and this is the essence of my question, how much did you find that who participates in the group doing this, I think you call it emotional testing, does it matter? Have you observed, independent on the composition of who's participating, executive or not, male or female, of a specific function or not, they kind of filter the same stuff? Or you said, well, no, it really matters who you put in this kind of emotional testing because the outcome may vary dramatically. What's the
It
experience?
matters a lot who you put in the emotional testing because those are the people who are going to have to sell the results to the rest of the company, not because it has a dramatic effect on the output. And
Okay.
the simple act of being in the room while the testing is happening causes the people to be more invested in the purpose and more aligned with the purpose and more in favor of the purpose and more emotionally attached to the purpose, and therefore they will be better ambassadors later. So you
Perfect
absolutely
sense.
want a cross-section of different levels and functions within the company so that your ambassadors can go out and reach all those levels and functions within the
Okay.
company,
Okay. So
not because it has a dramatic effect on the result.
let me paraphrase that because I think it's very insightful. So it's not, I'm using some simplistic terms, that the smartest or more knowledgeable people or the most feely people. You're saying who are the key ambassadors, multipliers, catalysts, and they need to be as much part of the process as possible.
Correct.
Okay, cool. Then what? What happens after that? So they tested it, they filtered it down, huge
So
filter.
now we have
They
to get
come
it
down
down to
what? With
one statement in
some,
each category, one of each of the four types, right? Which means now people are going to be reading these statements out loud over and over and over again. And now you have to test and see mathematically which statements are generating the strongest physical and emotional reactions. And then people will have wording suggestions. Well, what if we change this word to this word? What if we rearrange the sentence like that? And now you have to test and see whether the edited version is stronger or weaker than the original
right,
version.
right.
And this goes on for hours. This can take a long time, and it's good to break it up into different chunks because this is very repetitive and people get fatigued. But it's absolutely essential. And when you're done, you've got one statement in each of the four categories that generates very strong physical and emotional reactions in all the people who are doing the testing. Now, very importantly, this is a key. If there's one thing you could take away from this meeting that would be super important, it's that those reactions could be positive or negative.
Mm.
So if you have a statement that half the people in the room love and half the people in the room hate, that's your winner.
Oh, that's
If you
interesting.
if you try to fix that by changing it so the people who hate it don't hate it so much, you will average it out. It will get weaker and weaker and weaker until you have something no one objects to and no one is passionate about.
So
It is
let me jump in.
entirely normal for human beings to have strong negative reactions to accurate purpose statements.
So let me jump right in. How do you deal then with people that, when you talk negative reaction, they basically object it? They don't
Yeah.
like it. I totally get your
Yeah.
message. It's the intensity of the message. Something happens. So it's a strong message that resonates, positive or negatively. How do you deal with the rejection? Because the typical reaction would be, I don't like it,
I
don't
don't
use it.
like it, make it go away.
Exactly. How
And
do you deal in practical terms with that part, which you assume is
yep,
valuable? But how do
Happens
you deal
every
with it
time.
later?
So I
You
have
want them
had
to
this
be ambassadors.
conversation hundreds of times to
You
explain to
want
them,
them.
okay, so first of all, I just say what I just said, which is people have very strong positive and negative reactions to
Yep.
really good, accurate purpose statements.
Yep.
Some of you are having a positive reaction, some of you are a negative reaction to this. That means it's a good purpose statement. They're looking at me like, what? Right. And then I explain why. And the reason why is that people are intimidated by an accurate purpose. Like some of you were writing your purpose in the thing in the chat before. Here's how to know if that purpose is current and accurate and really potent. You hesitated before writing it in the chat. You were uncomfortable putting it somewhere where everyone else could see it.
Mm.
If that were true, then you know that your purpose statement is first rate. Maybe some of you were unwilling to write your purpose statement in the chat. Even better. That purpose statement is probably very accurate if you couldn't bring yourself to share it with the rest of us. So it's intimidating, almost embarrassing to have something that personal and that serious and that challenging out where everyone can see it. And people would
Got
rather
it.
make it go away and edit it and make it less potent so they're not as uncomfortable as they feel, because a purpose is a challenge. It should feel borderline impossible
Okay.
to do in
Got it.
order to be properly inspiring. So then the other thing I do is I say, and I have a way out for you. If you don't want this statement to win,
Hold a bit.
come up with
Hold a second.
another one that gets a stronger reaction.
Hold a second. Before
Yep,
you offer us a way out,
yep,
I'd like to quote the question that Mikkel asked. I think it's a very
yep.
interesting one, talking about the filtering, the emotional testing. And he's asking how much of it should be internal, the physical emotional reaction of the people in the company, versus having the external market customer perception in mind.
Yep. So if you ask yourself, can we use this purpose in marketing, that will water it down horribly, because
Okay.
people will have all sorts of fears about what will happen when the purpose statement is used publicly, and that will cause them to skew their numbers as they're voting on these statements, trying to get rid of anything that they think might be too bold for marketing purposes. So therefore, I always do it as a two-step process. The first step is, first, let's create our internal purpose statements that the world will never see,
Okay.
and
Interesting.
then ask the question, are any of these purpose statements, remember we're coming up with 4 different types, are any of these purpose statements potentially usable with the outside world? And
Got
the
it.
answer might be none of them, or maybe these 2 are and these other 2
Okay.
aren't, or
Okay.
something like that.
Okay. Fair enough. I think this is very interesting. And I do want to quickly read out, because you don't have a chance to look at the chat.
Yeah,
I
I'm not
do.
keeping up. Thank you.
Very, very interesting question and statement from Stefan. Hi, Tim and
Mhm.
Constantine. This resonates a lot with my experience at work. I found that working with executives on purpose, the journey of uncovering the purpose is more important than the actual statement.
Correct.
As the journey is so intense that it sparks off the full transformational energy true purpose provides. What is your experience? Is that
I agree that I think the process of finding the purpose has a transformational effect on the participants, which is another reason to have more participants. Um, and we've tested this under extremely bad circumstances, like in the Middle East, having Israelis and Arabs and West Bank settlers and leftist Tel Aviv secular people and rabbis in the same room working on the purpose of Israel. And within one day, we could get any group to align on the purpose of the country. And they are transformed, at least temporarily, by the experience,
yeah?
in that they all felt differently about one another at the end of the day than they did at the beginning. So that I completely agree. And the transformation we're creating with the company purpose is that people will feel more love for the company as a result of being a participant in finding the company's purpose.
Mm,
And so when a CEO says to me, well, I only want to invite these 8 people, and I say, okay, you've got 1,000 employees, and I just told you that I'm selling you an unlimited number of love potions, and anyone who takes the love potion will fall in love with the company, and you only want 8 doses. You've got 1,000 employees, and you want 8 doses of love potion.
okay. Okay, interesting. Before I go to the next question, I quickly want to read out because I think it speaks to the transformational nature. Stephen Carbaran shared, sharing my purpose publicly, however, has changed my life and made massive shifts in direction to letting it become true, to letting it become more realistic, even if it still feels ridiculous. It's about carrying catalyst of world peace. What I
Yeah.
love about his honesty is
Hmm.
once you go out to the world and share, the transformational impact continues. So not just
Correct.
creating it, because people react to it. People
That's right.
challenge you upon it. People find it ridiculous. So things
And
happen.
many people find it less ridiculous than you do, interestingly.
Possibly.
And
The point
yeah,
is, thank you for that observation and sharing that your experience, Stephen. This transformation impact continues as you start sharing it.
that's
That
right.
leads me to a really important aspect in my mind. Defining a purpose in a corporate context may be difficult enough.
Hmm.
What happens later, and I'm specifically interested in all the good practices to make it, well, I shouldn't even use the word stick as if it's like a post-it that needs to
No,
stick.
no, that's a good word. That's a good word to
Okay,
make it stick.
then we'll stick to that. Then we'll stick
Yeah.
to the word sticking. But let me be
Hmm.
specific what I mean, and I want you to comment on because I think this is where the holy grail is, in my humble
Hmm.
opinion.
Yep.
It's making it real and living it. And I'll give
Correct.
some examples just to direct the communication here for us is like, do the investment decisions of a company really use purpose as a bearing point in the future?
Hmm.
Do we reward and recognize leaders and people in the company according to the purpose? Does the
Hmm.
metric system, KPIs, etc., align to it? How
Yep.
do we engage positively, but maybe even filter and eliminate stakeholders, vendors, any kind of suppliers who may not align to our purpose?
Employees, don't forget employees.
Employees, yeah. I talked
Right.
about recognition, etc. How do I
Yep.
hire?
Yep.
So
That's right.
I'm just using some
You've just
examples.
named
Again,
6 what we call powerful post-purpose practices.
so
That is,
double click a little bit more on
yeah.
how essential in your mind is it you need to address them. Otherwise, it will probably
Well,
die the death of many of these. Nice statement. I don't believe it for a second because you don't live it.
it's the whole game. So the way I
Exactly.
like to put it is I say that finding your purpose changes nothing, living it changes everything. So the act of finding the purpose creates a temporary spike in inspiration, which it's a lot of fun, by the way. It feels really good for an individual or an organization. There's a spike like that of good feeling that results from a successful hunt for a purpose, a successful purpose finding project, which quickly fades. And then the only way to get it to sustain is doing what you said, because life will come rushing back in, right? Oh no, the vendor needs this, and our top customer is threatening to fire us, and oh look, the market's going, sideways, and blah, 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 stock price just dropped 10%. Like all that stuff will continue happening and try to distract you away from the purpose. And all of those other things are lower on Maslow's hierarchy, and therefore will successfully look more urgent than doing anything about the purpose. And so then 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months later, it's as if it never happened. And if that happens, you actually get a dip in engagement and a dip in trust, because it's like, okay, we weren't sure whether you were serious about the purpose. Now we know you weren't. Um, so it's once finding it, you have to do something with it. And you just named 6 really good things to do with it, right?
Mm.
Um, I'll name a few more. So one is that particularly the top executives, but everyone in a management position has to start becoming a broken record about bringing the purpose up whenever a decision is being made.
Okay.
And say, okay, well, we've got these 5 choices we could do. Which one or two of these 5 are most purposeful? Now, interestingly, you don't have to choose the most purposeful one every time. It's okay to say, okay, here are the 5 choices. This is the most purposeful one, and we're going with this one for financial reasons. That's okay. but don't pretend that that's not what's happening. People know, right?
Be transparent,
Be
be authentic
transparent.
about it.
Yeah, we look forward to the day when we can choose the most purposeful, when we can fire this client who's not purposeful, who's responsible for 40% of our revenue, right? Wouldn't that be great? This is not that day. So it's okay, right? You're dealing with adults. They'll understand if you explain it and you don't
Mm.
lie about it, right? But it has to come up. It has to come up over and over again, just like values. It has to come up over and over and over again every time you're making a decision. That's a very important one. Um, and then another one that yeah, and you mentioned a lot of great ones like rating the employees on how well they're supporting the purpose as part of the review process, that sort of thing. There's another really interesting thing you can do with the employees, which helps because you actually need, it turns out that aligning to a purpose and using a purpose in decision making is a skill, and not everyone has that. It requires you to have long-term and short-term things in your brain at the same time. And what most people will do is they'll ignore the long-term thing and focus only on the short-term thing.
Okay.
So they'll say, okay, that purpose is great, but right now we have to make this decision about this thing. Let's deal with that now, and then we'll deal with the purpose later. But then the purpose is always later, and it never happens. So the way you can tell whether you have employees who have this skill is in the interview process. You can ask them, what's your long-term goal? What's your purpose, vision, big, hairy goal, whatever you want? And it doesn't matter how they answer the question. If they have one, then they know how to do that. They know how to have the long-term goal and the short-term goal.
Because they practice it themselves for
Because they're
themselves.
practicing it in deciding whether to work for you or not.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Got it.
If they don't have a long-term goal of any kind, don't hire them because they don't have the skill of holding the both in their brain at the same time, and they will just automatically ignore your company purpose in all their behavior and decision making.
Okay.
Now,
It's a very
ideally,
elaborate
their
answer.
purpose would be aligned with yours, but that's a whole other
Yeah.
can of worms.
And actually, that brings me back maybe to the last question I'm going to ask. Before that, I quickly want to quote and have Julia's question addressed. She says, one of the methods which fits in the portfolio of methods and activities that you is to go back to the basically founding idea. And
Correct.
we know that many companies have a founding fathers and they have some founding, even stories or legends.
Yep.
How much do you use that method kind of finding the root and going back to the initial founding stories? Is that a good source of finding?
It's a great source for method one, the one that doesn't involve the unconscious, when we're saying what, in the same spirit of the question, what's the greatest impact this company could possibly have on the world? That's one good question. What was the founding idea or the founder's intention in creating the company in the first place is another great question for that same method of using consciously available information to try to get to the purpose information. We don't need that question if we're going into the unconscious, trying to find things floating around down there that know the company's purpose. Then we don't need to do that type of question.
Okay. Let me move to my last question before I'm going to check in on cancel leaders.
Yeah.
I'll leave that intriguing idea with everybody on the audience for a couple more minutes, outlining the last question. One of the biggest challenges I personally found in doing this work, and not limited to purpose work, it goes into vision, into mission. So the whole triad that comes along with it, etc., is how much does it align or not with the employee's purpose? Now, in huge corporate environments, many employees don't have a personal purpose.
Even in small ones, most of them don't have an individual purpose.
And I think colloquial wisdom is, well, ideally it should align as much as possible. Give us a real-time example where you think it is really important and this is what you can do about it and help employees identify their purpose and align to it as part of growing up in the organization that has a chosen purpose.
Yep. So I would say that aligning the individual purpose with the organizational purpose is only important if you want extraordinary levels of success, which interestingly, most organizations do not want. They're not really conscious of that, but given the opportunity to do things that would create extraordinary success, most of them will say no. And this is a good example of that. The consultants are all smiling. So,
So if I paraphrase,
um,
you can get by and do good, but if you want to do great, you need to address it.
well, it's a method. There are other methods. There are companies that have been extraordinarily successful without finding their company purpose or any of their employees' purpose. So I'm
Sure.
not going to sit here and say that this is the only way to do it, but it is certainly a
Okay.
way, and it's the way that I've used to create the most success in my clients. The ones that where the revenue just shot up were the ones where the companies found at least half of their employees' individual purposes and then had conversations about the alignment between that individual purpose and the organizational purpose. And the ones that really went nuts, they made it mandatory, like everyone had to do it. And I generally don't recommend that because it can get a little bit culty if you're not careful.
Okay. Okay.
Um, but the some of them on their own, without prompting for me, I actually usually advocate gently against this, but some of them on their own are like, no, 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 we want every employee to have their own purpose, and we want every employee's purpose aligned with our company purpose. That's what we want. And I'm like, okay, if you really want that, here's what you need to do. And that means that when you hire people, you're hiring them provisionally because they don't know their purpose, hiring
Yeah.
them provisionally, helping them find their purpose as an employee benefit, and then testing the alignment between the
Many may
organizational
stay,
purpose
some
and the
may
individual
leave.
purpose. Some may say, some may leave. And you have to make that reasonably safe for the employees. You
Yeah.
can't just say, oh, your purpose doesn't align with the company's, don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out, right? That it's not, you have to go about it in a compassionate and organized fashion so that it doesn't make the whole environment unsafe.
Okay.
And,
Okay.
but if you do that, then you get extraordinary levels of productivity because people are now coming to work because this is their best shot right here. This job that they're doing for you is their
Hmm.
best hope of manifesting their purpose in their lifetime.
Okay.
And boy, do they pay attention to their job when that's what's going on, as opposed to what most companies are doing, which is bribing people to work.
Yeah.
Right. And say, well, we know that, I mean, think about the economists say this, right? That we would all
Fair
be
enough.
not working if we could,
Fair enough.
but we
Fair enough.
have to for money. So therefore you have to
Yeah. Yeah.
bribe these
Fair
people to
enough.
come do this stuff they don't want to do.
Um, Take 30 seconds, a minute, Kelly,
Yeah.
Tim, to share in the chat where people find you. Because
Yeah.
before you told us, oh, if they want to look up, and there's some articles, some methodologies, there's 3 different websites. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing
And
that.
someone earlier put my strategy, I think Constantine put my strategy magazine article in there, which is a great one that kind of
I
goes through
did.
this
I
whole
did. I
thing.
did. And I'm
Yeah.
inviting people, as I'm going to go back to you and answer the question about the canceled leaders.
Yeah.
Why don't people in the audience share in a word, in 2 or 3 words, make it half a sentence, you're free, but feel free to make it short in a word, what it took away from today's session. Share it in the chat. And now I'm coming to solving that riddle. What do you mean by helping canceled leaders? I know this
Yeah.
beyond purpose is one
Yeah.
of your passions, and you explicitly invited me, and I think I want to be transparent. I loved your invitation. Ask me about it. I quickly want to share what I'm so passionate about lately. So talk us about what do you do when you say I'm helping canceled leaders?
Yeah, so we have a phenomenon in the US, and I'm in Berkeley, California, which is sort of like ground zero for this, which is that the progressive left spiral dynamics green culture um, is one of the things they're doing is evaluating people in positions of power and deciding whether they deserve those positions of power or not. And if they don't, then attacking them and their organizations relentlessly until they get fired. And this process is called cancellation. This person has been canceled.
I think we use the
Sort of
term cancel culture. This
cancel
has been to
culture.
Europe, even though we
Exactly.
may not.
Exactly. Now,
Some
some of
people
these
claim
people
we practice it a lot.
undoubtedly
Some people say not
deserve it.
really.
Yeah. So there's serial rapists out there who now can, like Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby, who now can't get work anymore. Okay, that makes a certain amount of sense to me. But there's a lot of people out there who just said or did the wrong thing once, and now they're unhireable, and their lives are destroyed as a result. And everything
Yeah.
in between. There's a whole spectrum. And we all make mistakes, right? But if every mistake you made was published to the entire world and used as evidence for you never to be able to do the thing that you're passionate about and earn money at ever again, that makes for a very unsafe environment. And it's kind of getting that way in the US. I understand it's less so elsewhere, which I'm happy about. So part of my job is to rehabilitate these people, get them back in the game, and help them relaunch themselves into the world. And in order to do that, they need a narrative they can use that sort of transcends and includes what happened to them, so that they're not debating with the people who canceled them, but they're also not permanently at the effect of it.
Interesting. Interesting. Very much. Thanks for sharing that. I don't know if that is a description of coaches, people, consultants that work in Europe, because cancel culture has made its way into our culture, but not as prominent, maybe not as brutal, in quotation marks,
Give it
consequences
time.
in the US. Certainly we're familiar with the term, but again, it may not be that visible, that consequential, that brutal in Europe. Thanks for sharing. I want to be sure that we don't lose too many people. It's 1 minute past. Guys, thanks a lot for participating. Those that didn't switch on the camera, one last chance to wave goodbye.
Thank you all for sharing your purposes. I was delighted to get to see what you all are up to.
Indeed, that was great. And switch on the microphone, just say bye-bye, and hope to see you next time. We're going to announce who we have probably in 6 to 8 weeks for another dialogue with a conscious thought leader. Thanks a lot, Tim Kelley.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Bye, guys. Have a good evening wherever you are.
Bye, guys.